Thank you, Lorianne, for already kindly introducing me. My name is Dr. Anna van Riebe, and I'm the founder of Ocean Vision Legal. And as a lawyer, my job is to understand that what we have just heard about the science and to think about if states' behavior is legal in the light of the science, or if governments can, must, and will be held liable in courts. Because let's face it, the scientific evidence of potentially harmful effect of plastic on the marine environment and on human health is painting a clear picture, and it's not bright. So while we are here at INC-5, this might be a good opportunity to take a close look at the existing law of the sea and to investigate if there are actually already obligations under the existing law for states to prevent, reduce, and control pollution. So this year, one of the highest courts in international law, the International Tribunal for the Law of the Sea, or ITLOS, rendered a landmark advisory opinion, which was requested by the Commission of Small Island States. This so-called closest advisory opinion is often referred to as the advisory opinion on the obligations of states to protect and preserve the marine environment with regards to climate change. But what it actually really entails is an in-depth interpretation of the state's obligations vis-a-vis pollution of the marine environment. And here it comes. Plastic in the ocean is a pollution, so that the findings of the closest advisory opinion apply one-to-one on marine ocean debris. So let's investigate together what that really means, because we don't want to have just a theoretical speech about the law. We really want to understand in practice, what does that specifically mean for states? What do they have to do vis-a-vis this closest advisory opinion? So let's look at it. The International Tribunal for the Law of the Sea mainly based its findings on one provision of the United Nations Convention for the Law of the Sea, or also called UNCLOS. And I don't want to bore you with too many legal regulations, but this one is so crucial, so let's read it together. And it says, states shall take, individually or jointly as appropriate, all measures consistent with this convention that are necessary to prevent, reduce, and control pollution of the marine environment. Okay, great. Again, we want to keep this practical. So what does that mean? So states are obliged to adopt necessary measures to prevent, reduce, and control pollution. Preventing pollution. Now I'm asking you in the audience, what do you think? How can pollution of the marine environment from plastic be prevented so that it doesn't even happen in the first place? Well, in my humble opinion, there is only one way to prevent the pollution, which is by reducing its production. And accordingly, the International Tribunal for the Law of the Sea also states that states must adopt mitigation measures. And with regards to anthropogenic greenhouse gas emissions, it said that central to such mitigation measures is the reduction. So the reduction of anthropogenic greenhouse gas emissions into the atmosphere, this is the same as the reduction of plastic into the world. So under the existing law of the sea, states are already under a legal obligation to reduce plastic production. Okay, let's look at the second element. States are obliged to adopt necessary measures to prevent, reduce, and control pollution. What does that mean? What can we tell states in practice now? What do they have to do? So according to ITLOS, the obligation to prevent, reduce, and control pollution does not oblige the states to provide a specific result. So we can't hold them liable in court for a specific result. However, we can hold them liable for demonstrating a behavior to achieve these results by adopting specific measures. So states must demonstrate that they adopted specific measures to achieve the result to prevent, reduce, and control pollution. And thereby, the ITLOS says that they can't just use any measure they deem necessary. They have to sufficiently show that they are trying. And how can we assess that? Well, by using a due diligence based on the best scientific evidence and adhering to the precautionary approach. So the due diligence must be based on best available science. And one way that the court retrieves the science that it adheres to base its findings on is from resolutions and from reports from international bodies and international instruments. Why? Because resolutions, for example, from the General Assembly and reports from international bodies or international instruments are usually supported by a large number of states, and that gives them authoritative effect. So when we have a resolution or report from an international body that is supported by a large number of states, we can assume that these states find or accept that evidence as valid, and therefore also the court adheres to these resolutions and reports. Well, lucky us, because there are actually quite a few United Nations General Assembly resolutions with regard to plastic pollution of the marine environment. And I just brought one example here from 2017. And in that, the General Assembly notes that marine debris, plastics and microplastics is a problem that has increased exponentially since the assessment in 2005. And get this, plastics is one of the greatest environmental concerns of our times, along with climate change. This means that according to the United Nations General Assembly, the problem of marine plastic pollution is as important as climate change. In that same resolution, the United Nations General Assembly goes on to say that there is a need for better understanding and to examine possible measures and best available techniques to minimize the level of plastics in the marine environment. And to this end, it refers to a report from the Executive Director of the United Nations Environment Programme. And again, also the United Nations Environment Programme is supported by a great number of states, and the reports from the UNEP provide evidence that an international court will base its findings on. And this report that the United Nations General Assembly refers to here is so crucial and gives us so practical advice of what states have to do that I cannot help but wanting to look at it together with you, because it's just so clear and it really tells us word by word what states have to do in order to satisfy their obligation to prevent, reduce, and control plastic pollution. And here it comes. While prevention is key, improving waste collection and management is the most urgent short-term solution. Long-term solutions include improved governance, such as a more circular economy and more sustainable production. And now listen up. There must be a drastic reduction or ban of single-use plastic products and a phase-out of non-recoverable plastic materials. And this is what informs what measures states have to adopt to comply with their obligations that already exist under the current law of the sea. If there is scientific uncertainty, and sometimes we don't have enough evidence yet, ITLOS says that the precautionary principle is key. The precautionary principle is a key element of any due diligence evaluation, and states must address even potential risks to the marine environment when there is no full scientific certainty. And in the light of potential risks, or where there is a lack of data, states must err on the side of caution. Well, and what shall I say? We have just seen it. There is clear scientific evidence that is warning of the potential detrimental effects of plastics on the marine environment and human health. And these concerns are actually enough to invoke this internationally legally binding obligation to adopt measures to prevent, reduce, and control plastic pollution. And again, this is not a voluntary commitment. This is a legally binding obligation that incurs international liability. The ITLOS also says, okay, the due diligence, we have different standards. And a due diligence must be very, very strict when the risk of the pollution is high, and particularly in cases of transboundary pollution. Plastic is transboundary in nature, as it is spread around the whole ocean by winds and currents. And it has a high risk of causing severe and irreversible harm to the marine environment and to humans. For this reason, the standard of this due diligence that we have to apply in order to find out what specific measures states have to adopt is very stringent. Surely, also the capacity and the availability of the states play a role in assessing what they have to do. However, and here ITLOS is very clear, this may not justify either postponement or exemption from taking all measures necessary, and states with capacity, with a higher capacity, must provide technical assistance to other states with fewer resources and capabilities. That was a lot, and I don't want to go much further, but just show you two more regulations because they are so crucial and again give us so much of practical advice what states have to do. The first one is Article 192 UNCLOS that says that states have the obligation to protect and to preserve the marine environment. Protecting the marine environment, according to ITLOS, means from future damages. Preserving the marine environment also means restoring the marine environment. And how can we restore the marine environment from plastic pollution? Well, states have to go out there and clean up the mess. And lastly, Section 5 and 6 of Part 12 UNCLOS say that states are obliged to adopt and to enforce national legislation to prevent, reduce, and control pollution, particularly where the private sector is involved. This means that states are obliged to adopt national legislation to control private companies in reducing plastic production, to adopt laws to prevent littering, and to controlling the pollution that's already out there. And with regards to international cooperation, ITLOS says that states must engage meaningfully in cooperating to formulate international rules to prevent, reduce, and control plastic pollution of the marine environment. So actually, the participation in these negotiations here at INC-5 are not voluntary. States are obliged to participate in them meaningfully. Okay, this was a lot, and this was all, but one last question remains. So what? So what happens when states do not comply with these obligations and with these standards? What happens if states do not drastically reduce single-use plastic items, for instance? Well, this obligation and these obligations are legally binding for the entire state community. If a state does not adhere to them, it can be held liable in international courts where states have legal standing, and it can be held liable in domestic courts where individuals and organizations can sue their governments. And I think this is what promises a lot of litigation work for our future. And I know this was a lot. So I've written down all of these talking points in a beautiful PDF for you to take home to show your delegates or to advocate in your governments. And you will find the QR code to that PDF that you can just simply download at the end of this presentation. And I'm looking forward to discussing with you in the Q&A. Thank you very much.